This is My Taste is Better Than Yours, the manga podcast where Guardian Enzel and I, Samu, discuss some of our favourite series and figure out, is my taste better than yours? Howdy everyone, it is Samu here, and I'm joined as always by my lovely co-host, Guardian Enzel, and we're doing yet again another segment of Jumping to Conclusions because Weekly Shounen Jump is powering through with these serializations at the moment, and we've got a lovely 4 batch to get through. Enzel, you're looking forward to this discussion? You're like begging you're clued in on everything Jump, really, at this point
Yeah,
now.
well, I came up, one of the reason I kind of hatched this idea for this episode, jumping to conclusions, is because I did think that it would be a good way to make sure I kept myself connected to what was happening in the magazine, but also because I just think this is the face of manga for a lot of people. So, tend to have 4 series premiering in the 4 series premiering in the matter of a few weeks, one a week basically. That's pretty unusual, I think, for Weekly Jump. If I'm not mistaken, you can correct me if I'm wrong. And none of them are dogs, spoiler in my opinion, and a couple of them I think have the potential to be quite good. So yeah, I am pretty excited. I think it's a good batch of series to talk about, and one of the old ones that we're going to talk about too is one I have a lot to say about. So
Yeah, it's not uncommon that you get at least 1 batch of 4 per year, and we definitely needed that because it seemed like for the first half of the year we only had these 2 batches of 2, and typically you're looking at like 10 to 12ish new series each year. So we had to get these numbers up, and some series had to get called. So yeah, she'll be talking about them shortly. But before we do that, let's check in on the previous round, which was Nice Prison and Otr of the Flame. So Nice Prison, it's right at the bottom of the magazine right now, and it might get cancelled soon. Everybody cheer! Yes, it might happen.
I won't miss it when it's gone. And I mean, I never thought it had a chance to survive. So whether I liked it or not was almost irrelevant. I wouldn't have seen any point in trying to get myself hooked on it. But no, it was pretty clearly not at a standard where I would have expected something to be when it gets picked up for a serialization in the biggest manga magazine in the world. Let's just put it that way.
Yes, it was quite shocking that I think it did get serialized. It did have one good ranking in table of contents, and now it's gone to the bottom. So I will not be surprised if that's one to go out the door very shortly. And then we also have Ultra of the Flame. Enzo, you will have more to discuss on this. But just in terms of how that's performing as well at the moment, it did have 2 rankings in 7th place, right in the middle, and now it has gone to the bottom 3 as of recording this. So it's a tough spot. It's in the magazine, especially with just this big batch coming out as well. Yeah, I have some thoughts about the series, but I'll let you kick it off, Enzo, because I think you're quite fond of it, I believe.
Yeah, I am. It's I like that it's unconventional. I like that it focuses on kind of the warrior ethic, and it's not glorifying the warrior mentality for its own sake, which obviously it's not the first Viking series we've seen that takes that attitude, but I think it's very interesting. The artwork, I think even you being a hater of it, I think even you would say that the artwork is great. And I'm poking the bear there. I know you're not really a hater, but yes, I think the artwork is really beautiful, and I have no baggage as far as Red Hood and that experience, which I think I sense from some scar tissue with you when you're discussing it. So I'm kind of free of that, and maybe that makes it easier for me to kind of not be caught up in looking for mistakes being repeated, which I understand that people might very easily see. For me, I just find it to be a really interesting series. And the other just weird, quirky thing about Otter is I just realized kind of this week, I hadn't really thought about it, that in looking at it, the aesthetic had always reminded me of something, and I never read Red Hood, so I knew it couldn't be that. I say that 10 times fast, Red Hood. But I remember then it hit me, Hideout Door, which was one of the many manga in a manga of Bakuman. And in fact, was of all the manga in a manga in Bakuman, that was the one manga that I kind of most thought, wow, that looks really good. If that were serialized as an actual manga, I would definitely read that. Um, and the aesthetic of this reminds me a lot of the aesthetic from Hideout Door, which maybe subliminally that was in my head from the beginning, and that was one of the reasons I liked it. But I think more likely I just liked it anyway. And then it occurred to me, hey, wait a minute. I recognize this from somewhere, and I hadn't thought about Hideout Door for years when I thought about that. So it's not like that series has been much in my mind, and it's not even a real series to begin with. So yeah, I do like it. It sounds to me like you're saying it probably isn't going to make it, which I think is a shame. But I think it's got a very interesting approach, unconventional approach, beautiful artwork. Clearly, some thought goes into it. I understand some of the concerns you have about it, and I understand why that would make it a harder thing to market. But nevertheless, for me, the quirkiness about it is something that I really like.
I do like the series as well. I think how I've described it to you, Enzo, is it's like your little. I feel like it's like my little brother, and he's making these mistakes, and he's like not studying for his tests and failing again when it was like, okay, you knew what you had to do, but you're kind of making the same mistakes all over again. So like I have some fond affection for it through Yuki Kawaguchi and just wanting him to succeed in the magazine. But yes, I do have some thoughts and feelings about it, and I do think. I mean, I'll be upfront. I think Red Hood is a better series. I think there hasn't been a chapter of Otr which, if we're counting like chapter to chapter at this point through Red Hood, that I've enjoyed more than Red Hood, and I think with that series, I could feel maybe that Kawaguchi had so much passion with Red Hood and the world that he was establishing, and he was having so much fun with it up until the moment where he had to come up with his ending, which I quite liked actually. That was quite rushed, but I don't know. Maybe there's some projection on my part. I don't know if I'm feeling the passion with Ultra of the Flame. This feels to me like I'm getting like Horikoshi vibes. This is like when Horikoshi had Barrage as his second series, which got cancelled in the teens between Makidoku Izu and My Hero Academia. This to me, Ultra feels like his Barrage. I can't really see it lasting long term, even just taking it out of popularity and how it's performing. I just don't know if I see the story lasting long term and it being particularly interesting or like the full scope of what I think Kawaguchi can do. But I think, yes, it's been an interesting exercise in seeing him repeating similar mistakes to Red Hood, where, he never left the village in Red Hood after being like, this is going to be an incredible adventure story. And then we're like, okay, when's the adventure starting? Then what happens? We're going to have this adventure story with Vikings, and then we're going to have like 3 chapters of quite verbose training, which in of themselves, I thought they were actually decent chapters. But I think just very poor choice for that time, that focus for a Weekly Shounen Jump series, and especially afterwards, effectively, not much really changed. It doesn't feel like much has changed for his character and his abilities in those sets since chapter 1. So it did feel like a bit of a pointless exercise, and it just makes me feel a bit sad because I'm like, oh, this isn't the right way to do it, and we can't even blame his editor, the same editor he had last time. So maybe the blame does come more down to his early like direction and like the scope that he goes for, and like where the nooks and crannies he's like taking the story. Wherein I kind of want to be like, okay, I know that you're like taking these little detours already, but we kind of want to see XYZ. I think that's where I'm at. So I'm not too sad that it is not performing amazingly, because I've been burnt by the flame of Ultra, I think.
Well, okay, so it's not the same editor. It's not the Shinigami, the legendary Shinigami that we talked about with Red Hood. But I would ask you this question though: there is an editor, and the same editor, no, but an editor. And if indeed you see the same mistakes being repeated here, which caused Red Hood to fail, wouldn't that be the editor's job to kind of prevent him from making those same mistakes again?
Yes, I mean that is that should be their job. So again, there is a failure on that part, but now maybe I am realizing that also as an amazing as an artist, and he's actually improved quite a bit since Red Hood. He definitely has more clarity now, and there's even more striking visuals with Otra. But I just don't know if Kawaguchi has the storytelling chops to fully pull it off. So I would not be surprised, and I would actually be quite hopeful that whatever does happen, if this does get cancelled, which I believe it will, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets paired up with a writer, because I think that would actually be more beneficial for his potential success going forward.
Well, that does happen sometimes. I mean, you do see that. I guess I kind of the word that popped into my head in the writing style is esoteric. He is a bit esoteric. He likes to go down these cul-de-sacs and these little tidbits that clearly interest him. And maybe I'm the target audience for those little cul-de-sacs. Maybe because they interest me too. I'm like, wow, I really like that he's taking the time to do this. I think this is an interesting sidebar. You wouldn't see this in your typical series of this type. I guess, though, esoteric is not necessarily the ticket to big success in Shonen Jump, especially if you're doing it in the first 6 or 8 chapters of the series. Um, I guess where I kind of maybe fall in line with you is I really liked that training arc for reasons I've kind of already discussed, but it maybe would have been better served to be 20 or 30 chapters in when you had something a little flashier and grabbier taking place to hook the
I agree.
audience in.
Yes.
And then you go to the training arc. Then you go to the training montage.
Yeah. I think there's just maybe a slight mismatch in the order of things, and what maybe he believes is what readers want to see from the series. So, yes, a little bit disappointing. I think people had a lot of good faith in it for the first chapter and the second chapter as well. But I also feel like, for another flame pun, I feel like reception has slightly fizzled as well. I do think, if I'm honest, when the next serialization round comes, which probably won't be till like September or so, if they are going to do another two serialization round, I will not be surprised if it's just Nice Prison and Ultra in the door, out the door together, because really I don't see what else in the magazine is going to be cut. There's a few other series that are like ending naturally soon-ish, which are like Blue Box and then the Elusive Samurai. But I wouldn't be surprised if both of them are next year at this point. And then we have things like Kill Blue, which is floating near the bottom, but it's had it's had worse moments in performance and it's survived. So I do think there is some fondness for it within the editorial department. So yeah, unless there is just a one serialization round, then I think Nice Prison will be cut. So maybe that to me is like the only saving grace for Ultra. So yeah, we shall see. No doubt we will talk about it next time. But what series did end for this one? With 4 joining, you had to get 4 going out. We had Super Psychic Policeman Chojo. We had Sid Craft, Love's a Mystery, Embers, and Star of Beethoven. And we did discuss the latter two
Yes.
on our first Jumping to Conclusion. The only one that was kind of not much of a shock for me, but like, oh, really, they did that, was Super Psychic Policeman Chojo, because yes, it was. If I was to measure the titles in the magazine at that point, I would be like, yes, that would be the 4th worth performing. But I maybe didn't even think they were going to do a 4th series, so I thought I would continue to coast along. I quite liked it. I did not read Salmon the Summoner by the same author a few years ago, but yeah, I think this was a very hit or miss gag series for me, where you had a psychic as the main character, and it felt like the psychic stuff kind of got dropped partway through, as just like these gags and like expanding cast got explored. Yeah, it was fun, but I'm not. I missed it a little bit, but I'm also, if I wanted a big 4 serialization round, and I got it, and I'm okay with this being one of the series to be cut. Whereas the other
Can I
3,
ask you a
I'm kind.
question? Can I ask you a quick question before you
Yeah.
talk about the other 3? Have they ever Do they ever change the number of series being serialized, or is that something like that's set in stone, and it maybe changes like 20 years? They might they have one more, one less, but it's always the same number.
pretty much for the past several decades. Maybe I want to say maybe since even like the 80s, late 70s.
Wow.
You're talking about 18 to 21 series
But it
any
isn't
given point.
always like it isn't always 19 or it isn't always 20. It could be 20, could be
Sure.
19. It can change within that. Okay. So when you're
Yeah.
saying, if they had to cancel 4, well, they could have canceled 3 and added 4, right? I mean, it's not like absolutely unprecedented if they were to do that.
Yeah, they could have. Yeah. I think what seems to be a pattern more recently is for series that are on hiatus, so Hunter x Hunter, that kind of exists as like usually when Hunter x Hunter is back, there isn't a series that replaces it. So then it
Right.
goes up to like 21 during
Right.
that time period. But if there are less titles in the magazine, there has, I believe there was a time a few years ago when there was 19, which was quite low for them. But they had more run shots running at that time and several other things happening. So, yeah, and even another batch we talked about previously, um, we only had one series ending and then two came in. So it's not one for one. Yeah, I don't know if you have much to say on Chojo or any other ones, so I'm happy to rattle through them. But Sid Craft, Love is a Mystery. I think that this was Tsutsui return after We Never Learn, and as happens, I would actually say more often than not is you see the fumbling of a veteran, making mistakes, not really garnering the fan base that they would have for doing similar things with their previous series. You just can't strike gold at the same time. I just think the setting of like old like Victorian England with a rom com is just strange. I just don't think that was ever going to appeal to a great amount of people. Though I will say, I actually had a decent wrap up where it felt like the final few chapters were would have been the final finale of the series. It just got very, very quickly to that point. And then Embers and Star and Beethoven, I'll touch on, then you can give your opinion since you are familiar with them. Is Embers, I think there was actually some passion with it throughout the series, even though it was very, very poorly performing. I quite liked the ending. I thought it had like a nice cap off and it was a nice full circle moment in terms of like student to teacher relationships and that sort of graduation to taking that as your goal. I think the final match and some of the visuals were really strong, but it never sold the audience, I believe, on the team dynamic in a way that I think some of the other sports series that we're seeing in this batch potentially have more chance of doing. And then Starter Beethoven, I just think similar to Nice Prison in some ways. I just don't think it was ready for publication yet. There were some interesting ideas, but it was quite amateurish from start to end and very randomized plot. And I just never fully got what it was trying to say, I'm afraid. So wasn't sad about those series really being cut. Yeah, any thoughts on any of those series, Enzo? I'm happy to
No,
hear what you
I
say.
don't really know much of anything about the first two. With Embers and Star Beethoven, which, as you say, were the two we did on our first episode of JTC, um, I actually think I kind of agree with you that Star of Beethoven was kind of had an amateur hour quality to it. But if I had to choose one of the two, if I had to read one of the two on the deserted island, as it were, it would be Star Beethoven because at least I found it kind of interesting in some ways, and maybe even that kind of that clumsiness about it made it more interesting. Whereas Embers was relatively slick and polished enough that it was just polished and slick enough to be even more boring than it already was, which I found it to be pretty freaking boring. So Embers to me was just it wasn't awful. It was just the worst possible sin any piece of fiction can have really is to just be boring, and that's what I found with that. Star Beethoven occasionally interesting, but yeah, not ready for prime time. Absolutely.
In that case, let's segue into this new batch, which I think you'll probably agree with me, Enzo. This is probably the best batch of the three that we've discussed so far. It does help
Yeah,
that there are.
absolutely. Yeah.
No, we should say, because it's a four serialization round, the time of us recording, first one has four chapters, latest one has one chapter, so we have slightly less to go off of as each one, but that's what we're basing our impressions off of as of recording. So the first one, Harukaze Mound, this is the return of Kento Matsuura and Togo Goto. This duo worked on Phantom Seer into 2020 to 2021, which was this kind of it happens often where you see the Western fan base cling on to a battle shonen and be like, "This is it. This is going to be the next big thing." And more often than not, it's going to not be the next big thing. The thing with Phantom Seer, however, was that it actually sold pretty decently. I believe it was like around 20k ish per volume, even up until the point it was being cancelled. Which, if you compare it to even like more longer running series in the magazine right now, it would be outselling them. So people were pissed off that it got cut. At least people online. So I think this is definitely a duo that people were looking forward to seeing them return. Yes, they did a one shot for Harukaze Mound and they turned it into a series. And what it's about the Kuzumi twins. You have the younger brother, Alkaze, and he's the once in a generation talent. He's incredible at baseball. Oh, I should say this is a baseball series. And we have the other twin, the older brother, Nagiharu, who is this lefty. Essentially, he's the bench warmer to his brother, who is able to imitate him and do his things when he needs to. And these two brothers, Alkaze, Nagiharu, Harukaze Mound, they had the same dream of reaching Koshin together. Pretty standard stuff for a baseball series of this ilk. First chapter picks up on their last, or like the close of their junior high years together. You see that dynamic of the prodigy brother and the younger brother, and the other brother who is in his shadow. And with the introduction of Ibuki, who is the another pretty important character in the series. He's a catcher who comes to recruit one of the brothers to join his new team of high school players, and this and the team that he's like crafting and putting together. He's going for more like misfits, and yeah, he has a vision for what he wants to do. And despite seeing Alkazi as like this incredible talent, he's honed in on Nagiharu, and he sees this weird lefty in the shadows copying his brother, and he sees the potential there. And from there, you see that relationship with them forming, and this potential fracture with the brothers splitting ways. And there we have the setup for a high school baseball Koshin series, where essentially you've got the gifted like prodigies and going to the school where everyone wants to go to, versus the eclectic bunch, which the main character is a part of. Yeah, before I jump into much more of my thoughts, Enzo, what were your feelings on Harukaze Mound, especially since you're not familiar with Phantom Seer? This is like your first impression with this duo.
Yeah, it is my first impression with them, and I like it. It is a very classic baseball manga premise, to be sure. You've got the Koshin element. Well, of course, you've got to have the Koshin element. Twin brothers, we've certainly seen that before. The overachiever, or the natural prodigy, and the one in the shadow. The idea with them is kind of interesting. Is that the older brother, who is not the prodigy, he's a southpaw. He's a lefty. So what he effectively does is he mirrors. He literally makes like a mirror image of his brother's pitching form, which he can do like perfectly, except in generating the results. And this catcher comes along, Ibuki, as you said. He kind of sees the potential in what Haru can do if what Nagiharu can do if he ditches this idea of just copying his brother and actually does something different. And so again, it's a very kind of boilerplate idea where you have the power school, the elite school, and then the school with the never had a baseball team before, and this is their first time having a baseball team. As I remember correctly, I think it was an all girls school, and then they and now they've just been letting boys in for a couple of years, and so this is the first baseball team they've ever had. It all when you're dealing with something that traditional, something like Days of Diamond, because I mean it's a seinen, so it's different, but that can succeed on the strength of its premise to a certain extent because it's doing something that's quite unconventional for a baseball series, and partly it has the liberty to do that because it's not a shonen. This one, when you're dealing with a subgenre that is this established and has this many tropes, and you're more or less staying between the guide, the guardrails. It all comes down to execution. Now we can get into the whole question of the Shonen Jump sports curse, the baseball curse, all these things, and all these things it may have to overcome. But setting that aside and just looking at it strictly from what I would try to be as objective as possible standpoint, I think the execution here is very good. I think the artwork is excellent. I think they did a very good job of establishing the two brothers having, they're not enemies. There's clearly, I think
I was really
the older
happy with
brother.
that choice.
Yes, and the older brother clearly he doesn't imitate his brother for any reason except that he recognizes that his talent is amazing, but
Hmm.
at some point he had to realize, and it took this outsider to come in and help him realize it, that he can't go through his whole life just trying to imitate and be a lesser imitation. That whatever happens in life, baseball or otherwise, he was going to have to chart his own path. Part of that was going to be going to a different school than his brother, which I think he realized is something that was in his best interest and probably in his brother's best interest too. So it has a fairly mature outlook in a lot of respects for a series about 15-year-old boys in baseball. I think it has a fairly mature outlook. It has a fair bit of nuance to the character relationships, how they interact with each other, where they fit with each other. We still have a lot of groundwork to be laid here with all the oddballs in the new team as they establish themselves as characters and how interesting is that going to be, yada yada. But at this point, for four chapters in, I quite like it. I think it's very good. I think it has an uphill fight to survive as a relatively conventional baseball series without a lot of Shonen Ai vibe to it in Weekly Shonen Jump. But uh, from a quality standpoint, I think it's quite good. And at this point, I'm hoping it succeeds.
I mean, I would say on that front that there is definite potential for Nagiharu and Ibuki's relationship. I can see like what they bring out in each other, and I think you can. This question for you as well, if you agree or disagree. I think if the series is going to survive, it's actually going to survive because of Ibuki, because I think he is the most interesting character, and there is something a little bit more magnetic about him than even the two brothers for me so far, which maybe is a criticism for like, we need to make the Haru of the Harukaze be the one carrying the series, but uh, th- from his first introduction, Ibuki has an air to him, which I'm like, okay, I'm glad he is in this series because I can just see him being an attraction for various fans for various reasons. He's a cute boy. I can see that for obvious reasons, but just even the way he drives the story forward and just his charm as a character, the series needs him, I think.
If you're going after the Shota demographic, he's the Shota. I mean, he's small, he looks young. In fact, he got kind of like he used to be on the national baseball team, and he took himself out of it because he didn't grow, and his teammates were all getting bigger and bigger, and so he got out of it because of that, and he kind of disappeared for a while. So he's like a formerly famous youth baseball player who kind of dropped out of everybody's sight for a while. I
Yeah,
agree
under
with you.
12s, I think it was.
Yeah,
Under
yeah,
12.
like the days of Diamond age
Yeah.
group, basically. And he's the one who's kind of driving the action at the moment. He's the one he's the dynamism character. He's the one who's forcing the events. He's the one who's kind of pushing the direction. I think in the long term, I mean, clearly, even though the name of the series is Harukaze Mound, the two main characters are Nagiharu and Ibuki. The elder brother is a supporting character. I don't think you would disagree with me on that. So that may change to an extent as we go further, but I don't think we're going to go through like long 5-chapter runs where we focus on the younger brother at his school and all that. I mean, frankly, he has the thankless job. He's the super talented. And it's like, wow, how interesting. He's great. Yeah, well, we kind of know. There are opportunities for his character to experience self-doubt, how he copes with failure for the first time, all this stuff. But I expect him to continue to be kind of the supporting foil character. I think in order for the series to succeed long term, I would say probably that Nagiharu has to establish himself as being like a co-equal driver character with Ibuki. I think that has to happen if the series is going to succeed long term. But I'm not convinced it won't. I don't see anything like wrong with his character at the moment. He's just been a little bit of a passenger to a certain extent because Ibuki is so forcefully driving things along himself.
You touched on it earlier about the uphill battle this has. Weekly Shounen Jump and baseball series do not go well together, which is funny because in the 70s there were plentiful amounts of very, very popular baseball titles in Weekly Shonen Jump. But pretty much since then, they've had a really hard go of it, while some other magazines have not. Obviously, there are plenty of anime manga baseball series that are revered and loved by many people. So it is a weird one that Jump hasn't had that in decades at this point. So yes, it does have an uphill battle, but I would say even if I'm comparing it to recent sports titles in the magazine, I think it's already gone around the problem that Nine Dragons Ball Parade had, which I think you also read that one, where it spent the entire time recruiting again these misfits for this team that it didn't catch the audience during that period of the story. So by the time the story was kicking off, it was like, and here's the matches, and then the story ends in 5 chapters. It was just like too much time spent on the less interesting part. And then comparing it even to Embers, which ended in part for the series, I think even though it's still very early days with these misfits that we're seeing, I'm already getting I already understand the gist of their dynamics between each other, and it feels more like okay, I can see these players in this game, in this story interacting with each other, and it being uh like it feeling correct and feeling intentional. Whereas with Embers, it just never clicked with any of the characters interacting with each other on the pitch, and that is like for a shonen sports series in particular, I think that is the main driver. People want to see like Haikyuu. They want to see how these characters that they individually love, how they overlap and cross paths in various ways. And I do think Ibuki actually gives a Nishinoya vibe from Haikyuu. That's kind of who he reminds me most of
Interesting.
from what
Yeah,
we're
I can
seeing.
see it. I
Yeah,
can see it.
which is interesting to have him in more of a prominent position within the narrative. So yes, that's why I also think he will like keep fans. Hopefully, he will keep fans at this early stage.
Well,
But yeah, I also I think the reason the why I knew okay this series is clicking with me is that even from the first few chapters, I was like I can see the road map of the series. Uh, you have said you don't think the other team is going to get much focus. I wouldn't be mad if we did occasionally jump to this other team and we got them established and as this long term threat. And then did check on what the other brother was struggling with. I think it maybe would be in some ways less interesting, but it would be more of a challenge to try and make him have struggles
mm,
amongst a group of other elites. I think there is genuine potential for something interesting there, and if you're able to balance the brothers and then continue their path together, yeah, I can already see this going for like you know first year the elites get to Koshin, but they fail at like the second round. Second year, the elites never make it to Koshin, and then the misfits do, but again they fail. And then the third year, they get there together, and they're the rival team coming together at the end. Uh, is it typical stuff? Yeah, sure, but it has the potential to just like deliver it in really strong, polished fun way that you just expect these sorts of like tropes to hit. And I think, yeah, from what we've seen so far, the delivery of the artwork and just the presentation of it is very polished. These are not newbies. Well, they are newbies in the sense that they haven't had a hit yet, but they have come back from the magazine a few times now. So, yes, I have want and hope for this to do well at this stage.
well, I do too. I just worry because when I was reading Green Greens, which as we both really liked, as I felt like even when I was reading it before I knew how it would be received, I was part of me was thinking I feel like this is in the wrong magazine. And when I'm reading Harukaze Mound, there is a part of me that's saying, I wonder if this is in the wrong magazine. Is this the right target audience for this series? Would it have been better, in Weekly Shonen or in Sunday? I don't know. I hope I'm wrong. Um, I but I do worry about that, especially after the Greens experience, where I had that very same vibe running through me almost from the beginning. And that was what I thought was, really an excellent series that just absolutely splatted about as hard as a series can splat in terms of popularity. So we'll see, but I very, very much hope I'm wrong.
And one thing that's worth pointing out is clearly there's an intention that they want a sports hit in the magazine.
I agree. They want
There
one.
isn't. I tried to look back. I could not find a batch where we had three sports titles
Yeah,
coming
that's
together
amazing.
like this. So yes, there is some intention there, and it would be quite deeply ironic and sad if the one title that is not is the one that has the most chance to succeed. Which, spoiler
Yes,
for this,
that's exactly what I think.
I think is what is going to happen. So yes, why don't we
Yep.
segue into that series?
Okay.
Series number 2, which is Kaedegami by Jun Harukawa. Yeah, the remaining 3 series, this is the first serialization for all of them. So yeah, we have no like massive returning veterans this time either. We have this fantasy story in a world that seems to be inspired by like ancient China. Demonic creatures called Shenguai roam the land, and we have our main character who is a young orphan, Ko, and he lives in the mountains alone. He lives with Shenguai, a mysterious one called Chiyo, who covers her face, and she seems just a bit different than all the others, mainly because she doesn't have a monstrous form, but a very erotically drawn woman in terms of her body. But Chiyo, we do find, has this past that is somewhat tragic, and there is definitely more to her than originally is seen. And they're an unlikely duo. As the first chapter goes on, it ends up becoming this more sort of like adventure story throughout this world, and the journey or for both of them, Chiyo to find herself, her former self, through her body parts, things that have been taken from her in the past, and I suppose also then for Ko to find himself in the world, and they're using each other as a way to do that. Yes, I think just to give my initial impressions of the first chapter, I think what Kaedegami does very, very successfully, and I think was a very strong choice, was it went small scale. Even though does seem like a battle shonen in various ways, it intentionally focused on the relationship of Ko and Chiyo, and it did not feel the need to give us lots of details about the world, the setting, all these organizations, everything. It was just there's not much info dumping, and I really liked that choice. And I even got some like Demon Slayer vibes from the first chapter. Maybe it being in the mountains, these demonic creatures, this orphan. I mean, the orphan and the family is a bit different, and there's I would say more tragedy in the Demon Slayer first chapter. But yeah, I was feeling similarities with that. Yeah, I think I'm just really sold on this bond between Ko and Chiyo, even from the first chapter, and since then, I've really liked it. One thing I did touch on was that Chiyo she's I think you can say what you think, Enzo. She's very much drawn in a tantalizing, erotic way. The author clearly knows that she's an attractive character and is playing to that. I think for certain demographics, but that's not my favorite thing in the world. But I actually don't mind it because I get the sense that it's almost like it's going directly to the audience, and it's never through Ko as a character, because there's still this sort of like sweetness between their dynamic, which is not tainted by that, and I don't think will be. So yes, another thing that where I'm like, even though there are very like tantalizing choices being made here for the benefit of the audience, I don't think it ever intrudes on within the context of the characters themselves. So yes, I'm very curious. What do you think of Kaedegami, Enzo?
Um, it's a mixed bag for me. You don't like her artwork, I know, but it actually reminds me a little bit of Iramukun, actually, from an art standpoint, of like the character designs. And not in terms too much of the story, just in terms of the character designs. To me, it's very interesting. At times I'm reading it, and at times I feel like it's kind of generic. like it's kind of a sort of an AI put together, uh, fantasy, shonen fantasy. Then there are other times where I think, oh, this is kind of distinctive. Uh, I would say that in the overall vibe of the first three chapters, what I kind of like is there's a certain cheekiness to it. It gets a little silly at times when you wouldn't necessarily expect a series to get silly, which I find to be a positive. It's kind of like in baseball we talk about pitchers who through breaking pitches and fastball counts and fastballs and breaking ball counts, they cross up the hitter. It kind of like what I feel like it's doing a little bit with me is it's kind of going cheeky when I'm more expecting it to go serious, and serious when I'm expecting it to get a little silly. And so that interests me. I don't find either of the two main characters to be that interesting at this point. I don't find the premise to be that. I don't find the setting to be that engaging. Like I don't want to get into a whole cold kind of tit versus tat kind of thing. I think there's a little bit of a similarity here with Otra, in that you have the young orphan hero who goes around with the spiritual creature and starts traveling. So they have that in common. I think the world building is more interesting in Otra. I find the characters to be more easy to sort of glom onto and bond with. This one is maybe a little bit more slick, a little bit more polished, which would be surprising given that you have a theoretically a less experienced, artist behind it. And there's really nothing about it that I dislike. There are little individual things. It's funny you mentioned the donkeys. I do think that it takes a certain talent to draw really, really funny animal faces. It's not as easy as people think it is. The animal faces in the third chapter are very funny. They're very nicely done. It's like they're really well drawn in a way that it's kind of like, okay, this is an artist that has a sense of humor, that has an ability to give form to the idea of something funny in their mind, which not every artist does, even professional artists. So there are things I like about it. I'm definitely in the undecided camp at this point. A couple more chapters, I may have a stronger opinion one way or the other. At this point, I'm kind of like wait and see is where I am with it.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, this is just where our tastes are different because I do see similarities with this and Altar of the Flame. And my argument would be, I feel like with Otra and Kawaguchi is writing these chapters, and he's like, "Isn't this stuff so interesting? Like, isn't this world so like all these things and concepts that I've come up with?" And I think like
Hmm.
people and me are kind of like, not really. Like, we kind of want to see what you promised in the first chapter. Whereas, at least with this series, what I'm getting is there's not too much promise or like expansion of what is happening beyond the characters. So, in focusing on this dynamic, which is really working for me, I'll be honest, I think it is coming naturally. Things are being introduced as they're introduced to the characters, and there is at least it feels like there's already an established goal and that dynamic that they have, that I'm on board with it. I feel like, especially the second chapter, I thought it was kind of moving and like quite profound. Actually, the part when they were on the boat and then the sky breaks open, and you have again it jumps from silly to serious, and then you had the moment of seriousness, and it became more of a moment for Ko to like discover himself and like open himself to the world. Yeah, I thought that second chapter is what was like, okay, I can see real potential for this series. And I don't hate how she's drawn. I just think there's a very wink wink nudge nudge obvious intention with how she's presented, which is fine. But also quite funny because and then the second chapter she turns into like a little chibi owl, which maybe you didn't find that funny. I thought that was actually quite funny, and to me refreshing visually that we're not always going to have them together in that way. though, if anyone is watching, if anyone is reading to get off on Chiyo, then maybe they were a little bit pissed off that she turns into like a snarky little owl.
No, that was funny. Let me also say too that in talking about our tastes, which obviously, given the name of the series, it's that's sort of the theme we go back to. And
Indeed.
the series, our listeners and viewers may have detected some patterns in the kind of stuff that we find appealing, and it does. I do find interesting with Otr and Kaedegami the artwork here. I'm fine with the artwork in both series. Don't get me wrong; it's not bad in either series. This series is much more in the, dare I say, the Bleach vein of having relatively Spartan backgrounds. They're not. It's the artwork is focused on the characters, and there's some like lovely shots of misty shots of mountains. I like that bit in the second chapter where there was a big fog and you couldn't see. I felt like that was really effective, but I also feel like because that was like really playing to the strengths of the artist. Whereas with Otr, I think you have an artist who really likes to draw detailed backgrounds and who really likes to draw, like a lot of detail and almost like classical, like almost like prints, and ukiyo-e, if you will. And so thinking about the stuff that I really like, Elusive Samurai, and I really like the artwork in Rurouni Kenshin, where you have these artists, mangaka, who love to do these pictures, and they love to do these almost like museum piece pictures and the impact panels, as you call them. And then you have the artists who like to do less detail, but it flows like water from panel to panel, which is more what you like. I think that's a fair statement. I think it's patently obvious at this point that our tastes diverge in that way. And so I think you have in Otr a series that is more of the impact panel style visually, and you have with Kaedegami a series that's more of the flow. So I think it is. I wasn't thinking about that before we started talking, but as you were giving your thoughts on it, I was thinking to myself, I'm looking back at chapter 3, and then I scrolled over to chapter 2, and I'm like, yeah, that's totally the case here. That's a distinctive difference between Otr and Kaedegami, and visually one is much more attuned to my sensibility, and the other is much more attuned to your sensibility. I think that's pretty clear cut.
Yeah, I agree with that, because even when we were talking about Bleach and the amount of times you've brought up the backgrounds, and this is not my first time I've heard people bring up backgrounds in Bleach, but it's always just been fascinating to me because I'm like, I genuinely don't notice. Hand on heart, never once has it impacted my like immersion in the story. So yeah, I think I really appreciate sequential panel to panel flow in the narrative and being able to like demonstrate that to the audience. I think that takes a genuine talent, which is a different approach than splashy pages for big impact. And yeah, I agree with that, because Otr, I think Kawaguchi is actually probably a better artist than Harukawa, which I think obviously comes with more time and already having serialization under his belt. And like I said, he improved from Red Hood, but both Red Hood and this, I think, have a tendency, for my opinion, to be a bit too cluttered in those big pages. And sometimes I'm like, okay, I see that he's moved the sword from there to there, but I don't think that was sequentially told in the way that my brain wants it to be.
Too cluttered for you. Let me just say that.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking at Kaedegami here, and all I'm seeing is the characters. I mean, occasionally I get something pops off the screen. I'm like, oh, that's pretty. But really, I'm looking at these panels, and I'm looking at the characters, and that's all I'm seeing. And I think that's because that's what the artist wants me to see. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's a style. But I do think it's very interesting that, there's more than one way to skin a goat, as they say. And we have different ways of creating an aesthetic. Manga is art. There's no question about it. People who are, snobs about it or whatever don't understand. It's much, much less true in Japan now, in Japan, and in starting to be less true in other countries. But manga is art. There's no question about it. And there's no right or wrong art style. It's, are you doing something that reflects who you are, and do you have the talent to create something interesting objectively out of that vision? And there's more than one way to do that.
I have two final points in on the series before we move on. Yeah, I originally said to you, I was like, I'm getting G fantasy from this, but I changed my opinion. I'm getting Jump Square from this in terms of the visual aesthetic, but then also when you have this like chibi owl, I also am getting like Magi kind of vibes as well. So yeah, fun enough, my influences in terms of the visual aesthetic of it aren't coming from Weekly Shounen Jump titles for me in terms of what I'm seeing. And the other point I was going to make was, funnily enough, in this batch of four, two of these new authors were actually assistants for Daisuke Inoshima's Fabricant 100, which was also his first publication. But yeah, quite noteworthy that I think two assistants on a very recent cancelled series have their own series now. And both of them, you can see that connection if you are familiar with, if anyone is familiar with Fabricant 100. For here, I would actually say maybe it's more in terms of the narrative. That is another story where you have a small boy and then an adult woman, and they're like, in that case, more like tense connection and this agreement they have with each other in a battle shonen setting, traversing, going around the world, fighting demons. Yes, very similar in that way. And I think for me already, Kaedegami has surpassed Fabricant 100. So, but yes, I'll mention Daisuke Inishima's influence in the second series as well. So,
I kind of remember Fabricant 100 as being a series that made a little bit of a splash, as I remember. Like, some people were saying, this is kind of interesting. It's different. Maybe it was divisive. Is that a good word? I remember it being kind of a divisive series that some people kind of really liked it and some people really, really didn't. At least that's how I remember it.
for me, it was a series where initial story premise setup and initial chapters was not conducive for a long-term series, but by the time it was wrapping up and Daisuke Inishima's artwork and like storytelling it was apparent to me that he was improving as a storyteller. By the end, I thought there was some very interesting stuff, but just not in the framework of the story he had invented. So he is a name that I would be curious to see him come back, and I wouldn't be surprised if in the next year or so. And funnily enough, he is an assistant who was an assistant for the Elusive Samurai for quite a while as well.
Oh, really? Oh, that
Yeah.
is interesting.
So another one of those
The
like
chain. Yes. The family tree, the red string of fate, whatever you want to call it. Interesting.
yeah. Let's go to your bros. Maybe your bros more than mine. So let me introduce. We have Ekiden Bros by Daisuke Nono. This is another newcomer, and it follows Nobunaga, not that one, but he, for all his life, he's grown up in this dormitory, or for most of his life, he's grown up in a dormitory full of these long distance runners training for the Hakone Ekiden marathon, which is 270 kilometers over 2 days. When I read that, I was like, this is crazy, guys. This is wild.
It is crazy. It's insane. It's insane. Ultra long distance running.
Yeah, ultra. And this is because his parents have these close connections to the university, and his father's the coach, and his mother works there as well. So he's fully immersed in this world of these long distance runners, and he dreams of being a runner, kind of, sort of, in the beginning. He has like a fondness for it, but he's never really like taken the action. And then the story kicks off when, after him being so immersed in the world, he's like pushed to enter his relay race at school, and he finds his love for it, for the sport. And yeah, it's only been 2 chapters since then, and if there is such a thing as a spoiler for 2 chapters, the second chapter already makes a very bold choice. But yeah, before we jump into that, Enzo, I'm curious to hear your thoughts more on Ekiden Bros, because even as we were going into this batch, this was kind of the one where you were like, you were feeling the energy. I believe this was where you were like, this was the basket in which your eggs were going.
Okay, so as far as my basket, which, who are you to talk about my basket? I would say I had high hopes and still do for the baseball series. I still like that. I think it has a real shot. But when I looked at the sports series, specifically the sports series, I thought, well, one of them I'm pretty sure I'm not going to like. And of the other 2 sports series, Ekiden Bros is the one that looked to me like it had the most chance to be successful, because just in kind of looking at the synopsis and the artwork and all this stuff, I was seeing a little bit of that Um, a little bit of that Shonen Ai vibe that seems to be a key component in many successful Shonen Jump sports series. And I've long since kind of gotten past the idea I have to be interested in the sport to be interested in the sports manga, because there have been lots of sports manga about sports that I have absolutely no interest in that have like totally amazed me, and lots of manga about sports I love that have bored me to tears. So I'm not a runner. Even before I had a bad back and couldn't be a runner, I was not really someone who enjoyed running. So, that side of it, I'm not someone who even really like watches track events on TV or anything. It doesn't really interest me that much, which is not in any way, shape, or form to diminish what these guys do. They are phenomenal athletes, and as you said, the ones who do this Ekiden they're crazy, but they have to be a great athlete to do it. Now, um, I like it. To me, this one has kind of a very aw shucks, kind of an open, friendly. I don't get the feeling that this is a series that's going to go dark. I don't get the feeling that this is a series that's going to have a lot of great life crises, and I just don't see it. I think that this one has kind of like an upbeat, peppy vibe of characters who are mostly good guys, who hang out and be bros, and I like this idea that this kid grew up with all these runners because, like you said, because his dad is the coach, and so he grew up around them, and he ended up being like really supportive to them and like helping out with the cooking and all that kind of stuff, and he was like almost like a mascot for them. But he was never somebody he had like a complex about it, like he could never do what they do because he saw how incredible they were, and he's just like I could never do it. And when he finally reaches a point, entering high school where he's like, okay, you know what, I'm going to give this a shot. And there are various reasons that go into that, but the long and the short of it is that's what happens. They're like, okay, well, listen, you were there for us for all those years. Now that you want to do this, we're going to be there for you. We're going to help you do it. Now, is that totally realistic? I mean, I don't know. But I'm not saying it's totally unrealistic either. And even if it is unrealistic, I think it's nice. I think it's nice that they're doing this for him. I think it's a fun story. And like I say, it definitely has a chance to get into some of that, that Haikyuu Ufuri vibe that is so appealing to demographics that were in previous generations, maybe not necessarily big sports manga demographics, and have become much more so in the last 10 to 15 years. And maybe even a little longer than that. Ufuri has been, gosh, probably almost 20 since that started. But um, so, it's pretty grounded and realistic on the sports side of it. It has a positive vibe. Some people may find the positive vibe to be a little one note, but I think a positive vibe can be a good thing. I think, Haikyuu, broadly speaking, is a pretty positive vibe sort of series. The characters do struggle. They do have problems. And there are multi layers and facets to it. And I'm not going to put this in that class. But I think on the whole, Haikyuu was a lot of like, cute guys, being goofy and interacting with each other. And I think that's the main thing that people really love about it. At least until the anime came along and gave us the best animated sports sequences in the history of the medium. But from the manga standpoint, I think that was probably the number one selling point. And in kind of a toned down way, I sort of feel like that's what Ekiden Bros is going for. I think it is definitely going for some of that same vibe. And I think, on balance, again, 2 chapters ain't much to go on, but I think it accomplishes it pretty well for those first 2 chapters. I'm undecided on how I feel about, a time skip 2 chapters into a series. It's not the first time I've ever seen it, but it is unusual. So I think how the third chapter goes over after that time skip is probably going to be pretty important in determining what the series prospects are for me. So that's where I am with it.
Yeah, I think where I'm at with it is, to me, it all just feels a bit easy. You say nice. You said nice a few times. It's a very nice series. It's very pleasant and warm, and they're just having a good time. But there's just everything about the way it was framed and like the even down to just like the foundations of the narrative itself. I feel like the goal doesn't seem that unachievable. It doesn't seem that far away when you have so many characters around this main character who have this already, can support and train and want him to do this. He has, whether natural talent, resources, nepotism, I don't know, some combination of all of that. It seems like, at least with the second chapter, narratively he's been like removed from this group, at least, so that is actually probably the more positive direction, I think, for me.
Agreed.
But yes, I just, especially in the first chapter, I was like, okay, he has all these things, and there wasn't enough tension or like grit to like me to make me want to like be invested in the potential journey that this Nobunaga is going to go on. But I won't deny that it's pleasant and the characters were fun. I think of all the titles, this probably has my least favorite artwork, even though it's not bad at all. Daiki Nono has a habit of drawing open mouths quite a lot. That happens with a lot of series, but there's not very many panels I feel like where there is tight lips, especially with the main character. So yes, everyone is smiling in their open mouth, and yeah, I'm not finding enough to grip onto in terms of the characters themselves, but also making me convinced that this journey is going to be a compelling one. If I'm being frank, I do think it's a very bold choice to have a time skip in the second chapter, spoiler, and B, for this now to be a college story in Weekly Shounen Jump. So if it is slightly different in that regard, but one part in the second chapter was genuinely made me like belly laugh with like maybe not the absurdity, but just like the frankness to include this verbatim. I'm going to read it verbatim. This line: long distance running is fundamentally disconnected from all the tropes you see in sports shonen manga. I'm
Yes, I
like,
saw that.
okay, bro, Daikyono. Very funny. I don't know if your series is going to be that special. You are going to have some tropes that are going to be very common for sports shonen manga. I just thought that inclusion was very, again, bold and interesting. And I also feel like, especially for the first chapter, the pacing of like managing the race and then what Nobunaga was like preparing for it, just the passage of time itself, I thought was a bit messy, which I think maybe just comes down to Daiki Nono being a newcomer. Maybe the only thing I would say is there could be potential for some darkness, like in quotation darkness, because there were a few panels where like Nobunaga was in this concentration mode, and they were like, "Oh yeah, he does this sometimes," and I was like, "Okay, uh, I wonder where we're going to go with this little element of his character." That's kind of my thoughts. I think I'm more tepid on it than you are. And based on the reception it seems to be getting so far, it seems to be the least talked about of the four. And I think its Jump Plus, Shonen Jump Plus views aren't great either, which is kind of surprising for me in some ways, because like you, I thought that this, in terms of premise and sport, could have attracted that audience that you alluded to. You know, I think of like Run with the Wind. That definitely like grabbed an audience with similar sport as well. So, but I don't think that is going to be that sort of series, if I'm honest.
No, and I don't consider that necessarily a bad thing because I'm not a fan of that series, but that is a college series too, I would point out. But it is unusual now that you mentioned. I hadn't really thought about it, but I trying to think back on when the last Jump series that was set in college. Do you remember what that would be? Because it's nothing is popping into my head just
I
off
mean,
just off
I
the top of my
can.
head.
I'm trying to. For sure, there are characters who like go to college, but as
Yes,
like a
but an
main.
actual college setting.
No, not a college setting even because even like something like Akane Banashi, she is like post high school, now she's in her like
Right.
20s in the series, but she's never at college. So yeah, you have characters that age, but that setting, nothing's coming to mind.
It's just like, all right, we're getting into something where the third chapter is going to be very, very different from the first two, almost by necessity. So, like, that's why I say I think the third chapter, more than in most cases, if you're going to give me a time skip in chapter two, you better nail chapter three.
Let's jump over to the last one, which will probably have the least to talk about because it is only one chapter and because it's not Enzo's
Among
favorite.
other reasons.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
This is Ping-Pong Peril by Yoshiharu Kataoka, and this was another one where we have a newbie who is an assistant or was an assistant for Fabricant 100. For this one, however, I definitely see the artwork influence in terms of character designs, paneling, more than the like story narrative decisions that we saw in Kaedegami. This is as the name would give away, a ping pong series, and it follows the former prodigy Tyra, who we jump right in, and he has this crippling debt. Him and his sister are being like abused and like taken advantage of by these debt sharks. You've got the degenerates of the underworld and all these things, and very kaiji, and just like the absurdity of some of the presentation that we got here. And then this is very much like fish out of water. He's thrown into this underground game of ping pong to pay off his debts, and we see in the first chapter that he has the like showdown with the debt collector from the first chapter. Is I would say like yeah, it is a bit crazy and wild in presentation, but maybe my thing that I would say is weirdly not enough. If you're gonna go all out there and be stylistic to the point of absurdity, I would hope for it to just be like just go full stupid at this point. And I feel like this was like 70% stupid. Maybe this is going to be another thing that we diverge on. I am not. I don't need a sports series to be realistic, even though that is my preference of the two. But yeah, if it really is going to lean into it, then I'm going to wait and see how these other chapters turn out. I do not get why Mitsuki, the like lead female character, she just like randomly has a gun. They don't explain that, I guess, and she just appears literally from nowhere. Weird. The weird choices in this. I would say definitely not boring. But I'm entertained, but as I say, I want to be even more entertained with the stupidity. So that's my hope going forward.
Well, I agree it's stupid. Um, there's basically we've seen, I think, among the genres that I think have developed in the last few years, the subgenres, one of them is what I call the sports manga for people who hate sports, and the sports anime for people who hate sports. And I think this solidly fits into that. It solidly fits into that vein. I feel like this is kind of like a series that would not exist if Blue Lock had not been come along and been a monster kaiju hit. When that happens, even a mediocrity like Blue Lock, if it becomes as popular as that does, of course, there's going to be series that try to cash in on that. I think, Weekly Jump said, look at that sweet, sweet Blue Lock money. Let's get us a piece of that. So I think when they saw something that had a chance to go for that same vibe, I think they were like, hey, let's give it a shot. I think it's pretty hilariously bad, to be honest. But not hilariously bad to the point that it's hilarious. Just kind of it's hilarious how bad it is. Um, what it reminded me of actually was there is actually a manga. I never have seen any of the manga. I only became aware of it, but whether it was an anime. There was an anime called Tohai. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It came out last year, based on a manga about mahjong. And you think, okay, mahjong, all right, but it's mahjong, and it's like yakuza mahjong, and it's like everybody is like has guns, and everybody's most of the series was kind of like mahjong games where people had some appendage cut off their body, like if they lost, and frequently toes. And it got to the point where my unofficial name for the series was Hikaru no To, and I actually that achieved that kind of level where you described it, of like not being 70% of going, but 100% of like going so over the top, embracing the stupidity in such a completely unabandoned way that it sort of became fun and amusing, just because of how completely bonkers it was. And so I do get what you mean by that. Now, mind you, it got to the point with that where it's like I was like, okay, I've seen enough toes get cut off. I'm really kind of lost interest in this. Uh, but this is just like it doesn't even have that. It's just like it just feels like a very transparent, money grab kind of a series without anything interesting to say that doesn't even bother trying to make sense, but not bother trying to make sense in a way that's like, oh, we're going for absurdism, we're going to zany madcap. It's like we're too lazy to try to have it make sense because it's nobody's going to care anyway. Which, if you like Blue Lock, is probably true. So, unfortunately, of the three sports series that premiered, a part of me says this is the most likely to be successful because it's kind of a non-sports series, which maybe has a better chance in Weekly Jump, because it has been proved that this is a subgenre that has marketable potential now. It's not like hideously ugly to look at or anything. The artwork is more or less professionally done. So it has enough overlap with a much loved manga title that people may have that confusion for a few minutes at the beginning. I just wish it had a couple more P's, because if it was PPPPP, it would be a lot more interesting as a series, as we know, than PPP is. I hope, I never wish, being a mangaka is hard. People dream of it. I never wish a lack of success on anybody. I'm not going to lose any sleep worrying about whether this series makes it or not, because I don't think it would leave any kind of a gap behind if it didn't. No offense to the manga, no offense to the mangaka. I wish you all the best, but it's not for me.
Yes, I do think there is, at least in terms of the other two sports titles that released in this batch, there is a distinction in the approach to this one, where I do think maybe Harukaze Mound and Ekiden Bros would like consume each other and be more rivals. I would be
Yep.
willing to bet which one would win of the two at this point. So maybe Ping Pong Peril, maybe it does like craft its own lane, which should be a smart way for a success. I'm less pessimistic than you. I did not love it. There's some things I want to see done better, but again, this is one chapter to go off of. I think it does a thing that Otr also does, which I don't like, at least with this first chapter, which is the chapter just kind of ends. And I'm like, okay, there wasn't really much of a hook there. I feel like there, especially for a first chapter, I want a hook. I feel like there was like 5 pages missing from like establishing what was going to happen next. Yeah.
The last thing in the world I wanted was 5 more pages of that.
Well, so I take it you're not going to be continuing this one. So I shall just be
No,
reporting
I'm
live.
done.
I'll be reporting live from the pages of Weekly Shounen Jump to let you
Okay.
know how this is doing.
Okay.
Uh,
Thank you.
Let us move on to then just the ratings that we give these. So, like last time, we'll do like letter ratings, like A, B, C plus whatever. We have our own metric that we go by this. So I can list through mine, and then Enzo, you can do yours, and we can just give our
Okay.
uh, predictions as well on what we think of the batch is most likely to survive. Uh, if I'm to go in order, I would say for me, Harukaze Mound. Okay, the first like chapter or two like really got me hyped. I think it's now settling into a good place, but there is sort of like a wait and see of the establishment of where the premise is going. I'm giving that a B plus, very strong B plus. Kaedegami, I would also give a B plus, thanks to the second and the third chapter, which I think have sold me much more in the dynamic and the direction it's going from here. Ekiden Bros, like C for me. Again, that's my Ping Pong Peril for you. I would not miss it if it was gone from the magazine tomorrow. And then Ping Pong Peril is like C plus, where I can see the potential for where it could go from here. But yes, I just want it to go crazier. So if it goes crazier, then that rating may go higher, and I might have more fun with the series. And if I was to like rank them based on how I think they're going to survive, my prediction would be I have good feelings about Kaedegami. I feel like that's going to resonate well, and I think that has the best chance of survivability. I think after that, you've got Harukaze Mound and Ping Pong Peril, and then below that, I think Ekiden Bros, which to me feels kind of dead on arrival, if I'm being honest.
I'll go in chronological order. Harukaze Mound, I give a solid B. maybe almost a B plus, kind of right in that B plus range. Um, Doing a lot of things well. Not anything that's absolutely grabbing me by the lapels and demanding my love, but off to a very solid start. Kaedegami, I'm probably C plus on that. Again, kind of generic in a lot of ways. But in a funny sort of way, I know we both actually, because I mentioned, I mentioned Iruma. We both cited visually non-jump series as being the main things that popped to mind when we were reading it. Although for me, in many ways, it feels like the most jump series of this batch of four. Ekiden Bros, I'm again B with that for reasons that I described. I think it's just a nice, upbeat, fun, goofy sports series. Which I don't need more than that, but most people probably do. Ping-Pong Peril, probably D. Just I'm not going to give it I'm not giving it an F because
You're not giving it a P.
It has a no. The last thing it needs three more. I'm giving it a D and maybe a D plus because it's professionally done, but it's just crass and silly. As far as survivability, I agree with you, Kaedegami. I'm going to put that rank at number one in the most likely to succeed. Number two, I'm going Ping Pong Peril because, as you said, it has the best chance to carve out its own lane. Whereas I think Bros, and it's funny that the one series is about Bros and then the other series is called Bros, but I think Ekiden Bros and Harukaze Mound are probably to a certain extent going to fight over the same readership. Which is not a typical jump readership to begin with. Whereas I think Ping Pong Peril, that has a chance to sort of be kind of like, as you said, its own lane. So I'm going to say survivability. I'm going to go Kaedegame 1, Ping Pong Peril 2. Really, really hard call between the other two sports series. I'm going to say Harukaze Mound 3 and then Ekiden Bros probably 4 because, in the end, it's probably too nice for its own good.
I think in many ways this is quite a noteworthy batch. We do not get 3 sports series like this. It will be quite sad if the 3 sports series, if none of them succeed. Though maybe you would rather that than Ping Pong Peril being the only one.
Yes, I would rather that than Ping Pong Peril being the only one, yes.
Okay. Interesting batch. I'm glad the Saito, the editor-in-chief, did this one. I think this is more optimistic for me on balance than the last few. And yes, I do think the last batch that we talked about, Nice Prison and Otr, are the ones in danger when we do come around to the next serialization round, which we'll be talking about when that does come. So until then, Enzo, thank you for discussing all these Weekly Shounen Jump titles, and then hopefully everyone listening gave you something to like check out because they are quite varied.
Check them out. Except for PPP, yes, exactly.
Thank you. Bye bye.
No, read them all, make up your own mind, and stay frothy.